Welcome to this joint policy lab of the European Urban Knowledge Network, the EUKN. We are organizing this policy lab for two of our members, Germany and the Netherlands. My name is Martin Grisel and I'm the co-moderator of today's policy lab. The EUKN is a network of member states and we are working very closely with national governments focusing on urban matters. And more precisely, we focus on national urban policies and sustainable urban development. Over the past few years, we have been deeply involved in the establishment of some of the strategic urban agendas at the level of the EU. It started actually with the original Leipzig Charter in 2007. And over time, we have been involved in other strategic urban agendas, like the Urban Agenda for the EU, which was established under the Dutch presidency. And more recently, last year, we have been contributing to the new Leipzig Charter, which is now the main strategic framework for urban policy within the EU. This new Leipzig Charter is now 1 year old, and we see that with the other ministerial meetings that have taken place since then, the Ljubljana meeting, which agreed on a further implementation of this new Leipzig Charter and installed also a new generation of urban agenda partnerships. All in all, it is time really to look into the relevance of the new Leipzig Charter, and that is really the topic of today, and more specifically, the relevance of the Leipzig Charter for cities. So we want to show and to demonstrate how this Leipzig Charter can be put into practice, what it really means for cities. And by doing so, we will be focusing on two key elements of this new Leipzig Charter: the policies for the common good, which will be explained in further detail by our keynote speaker, and digitalization. So today, indeed, we will look into the relevance of this Leipzig Charter and how it will be picked up by cities, but also by member states, focusing on different aspects of this new Leipzig Charter. And more specifically, to give you already a bit of an example, next year, France will focus on one of the dimensions of the city identified in this new Leipzig Charter, the social city. And later, next year, the Czech Republic will focus on digitalization, two key elements also of this new Leipzig Charter. With representatives from cities and from different ministries in both the Netherlands and Germany, we will be discussing indeed this new political framework. But before we go into further detail, I would like to hand over now to my co-moderator and colleague, Lea Schwärzer. So please, Lea, you could introduce to us some technical details of today's meeting.
Indeed, I'm Lea Schwärzer, thank you, Mart. And we'll run you through a couple of the technical announcements we need to make in the beginning of such a meeting. Well, firstly, we are not only here on a Zoom webinar, but we are also live on YouTube, streaming this video. So for those who are watching there, welcome. And you will also be able to watch the recording afterwards and to share it with your network. That might be handy to know. Also, we have interpretation available in this meeting for those who are joining on Zoom. And that is for those who need the German interpretation of today's meeting, which will be in English only. I will briefly switch to German to introduce those to the German speakers in the audience. Wenn Sie der Übersetzung, der Verdolmetschung gerne auf Deutsch folgen möchten, dann wählen Sie bitte in Ihrer Zoom-Applikation unten in der Leiste das Icon mit der Weltkugel, wo Dolmetschen oder Verdolmetschung steht, aus. Und dann können Sie dem deutschen Kanal folgen und dieses Meeting auf Deutsch hören. Switching back to English, because that will be our language for today. Indeed, all speakers are going to speak English. We would like to ask you also, if you have questions, that is possible, you can ask them in the Q&A. And don't use the chat for that, please, because, well, via that we will make some things known to you, but it is just handier if it is all in one place, and that is the Q&A section, also to be found at the bottom of your Zoom application. And we have someone here behind the screens, our dear colleague Livia, who is collecting questions, and via us, they will be posed to the right person. So trust us for that. Mart already mentioned briefly the key elements and focus topics of this meeting for today, but I want to briefly run you through the entire program. So we will start now with another real opening by the two ministry representatives of the two ministries responsible for urban matters in Germany and in the Netherlands. Then moving to a keynote speech by Frauke Burgdorff, building councillor of the city of Aachen. And then we have indeed two panel discussions, one focusing on urban governance for the common good, and the other focusing on digitalization in the wake of the pandemic. Enough to discuss, and we are really grateful to have you here, also to have all speakers here. And with that, I would like to hand over to Erwin Schwärzer, who is head of department SW on urban development and housing in the Federal Ministry of the Interior, Building and Community in Germany.
Thank you, Leah and Martin. Dear Karen van Dantzig, dear ladies and gentlemen. It's really a pleasure for me to welcome you all today on this joint Dutch-German Policy Lab. Of course, we all would have wished for a physical meeting, but due to the current situation, we are not able to meet in person. And I think due to Omicron, this situation will last for a few weeks or maybe months longer. Nevertheless, we know that our colleagues from EUKN have a lot of experience in holding digital policy labs, and I'm sure we will have a good exchange this afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank all the colleagues at EUKN very much for organizing this event and for bringing urban practitioners, which is very important, from our two countries together. I suppose you are all aware of the latest developments in Germany. Last week, a new federal government was established as a result of the general elections in September. This is really a major political change in Germany, and for us in urban development, this means a lot of change in particular. So we are no longer part of the Ministry of the Interior. We have our new Ministry for Housing, Urban Development and Building, which was created a few days ago. So we are, as a colleague said, a kind of startup ministry right in the moment. It feels like a startup, so I can tell you. This is really a spectacular innovation, and it underlines the high political relevance of the issue we deal with. The coalition agreement of the three parties that form the government highlights the need to invest more into urban development, smart city strategies, Baukultur, or inner city areas, which is very important to us. The big headline is, of course, climate adaptation and climate mitigation to achieve the climate targets. And what I really would like to emphasize here is that the coalition agreement mentions the new Leipzig Charter. We are very proud of this, of it. So it was mentioned as the guiding framework for all activities with regard to urban development. I think this is very encouraging also for our policy lab today. Yes, Karen, and I heard for you in the Netherlands today is an important day as well. You reached a government agreement, took a bit longer than here in Germany, but finally you got it. Congratulations for that. I'm very confident that we will continue our close collaboration with the new government, and I'm looking forward to this. Yeah, the Netherlands and Germany share a long, successful history of cooperation in the field of urban development at different levels. Many of you know that from first-hand experience. Many cities have established long-time partnerships, especially those in border regions, and we can see the same at the regional level in the form of long, strong Interreg programs. At the national and the European level, we also cooperated very closely for many years in the context of informal collaboration on urban development and have a well-established continuous exchange. The same holds true for the preparation of the new Leipzig Charter. The Netherlands have constantly contributed to the Charter and played a very important role in the negotiations. Thank you very much for helping us. And that is also why we are here today. Not only to celebrate this long and good cooperation, but to learn from each other and how cities have embraced the principles and guidelines of the new Leipzig Charter. About 1 year ago, we adopted the new Leipzig Charter at an informal ministerial meeting under German EU Council presidency as a further development of the Leipzig Charter of 2007. This strategic framework serves a compass for cities across Europe, guiding them towards future-proof and, what's most important, livable urban environments. In Germany and the Netherlands, cities face many similar challenges, such as climate change or social polarization. In order to address them, the new Leipzig Charter calls for coherent urban policy at the local, national, and European level. One of the main principles of the Charter to achieve this is a governance for the common good. The common good is really a well-established concept in German urban development, but was quite new to many of the European stakeholders in the process of developing the new Leipzig Charter. I'm sure that we have some good examples today that will shed more light on the practical implications of common good. A crucial role to preserve the great qualities of European cities plays digitalization. It has many faces and can help to connect people, build up networks, and serve as an intelligent tool to be used for planning processes and a lot more. I know from many years of personal experience how digitalization can support the implementation of many of our objectives. We will also learn more about that from good examples. I know that we have brought together inspiring and forward-thinking front-runner cities from the Netherlands and Germany today. Two cities come from Baden-Württemberg, where I used to live for 40 years, so I'm very proud of it as well. I'm especially proud to see stakeholders from two pilot projects of our national urban policy represented today. The German national urban policy was established in 2007 when the first Leipzig Charter was adopted. With this policy, we have introduced new instruments to constantly develop further the national funding programs and initiatives for cities. Among them are our so-called pilot projects. We have successfully funded over 160 such projects across Germany since 2007. Within this framework, the projects are given the possibility to experiment with new approaches and instruments, and I am convinced that we can learn a lot from their success, but also failure and obstacles they have encountered. I think today is a great opportunity for them and all other cities involved to share with us their knowledge and how they put the new Leipzig Charter into practice. I look very much forward to the exchange today and in the future, and I would now like to hand over to the Dutch urban envoy, Karren van Dantzig. Thank you for your attention. Karren, you may continue now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Herr Schwärzer. Thank you, Erwin. First of all, Chris Kuipers was supposed to be here, the Director General of Governance, Spatial Planning and Housing, and he apologized for not being able to participate. As you might have heard, our new government has reached an agreement. Actually, at 1:30 it was presented, so I'm still reading it. This will dominate his agenda for the foreseeable future. Nevertheless, I welcome you all on behalf of Chris, all participants from Germany, the Netherlands, and beyond to our joint policy lab, which should not only be an interesting exchange of ideas, but also proof of the excellent relations and cooperations between our two countries. You, for example, already mentioned the cross-border cooperation. I would just like to mention a case in point that from the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, in which my department was involved, the Netherlands and North Rhine-Westphalia succeeded in keeping our borders open. This was by no means given. In the Schengen areas, around 37 of the 39 borders were subject to controls or even closure. National reflexes prevailed at the expense of our European idea. But in this case, a long-lasting friendship and the will to cooperate proved stronger. So that's a very nice example. Today at this policy lab, we will mainly focus on cities, and more specifically, the new Leipzig Charter, already called, as you indeed did, the new compass for sustainable urban development in Europe. It has been a year since State Secretary Bole chaired a meeting of ministers and successfully secured their approval for the new Leipzig Charter and its implementation document. The Netherlands was involved from the very beginning. Our strong support was underpinned by the speech that Minister Ollongren has given at this moment. The new Leipzig Charter is an EU-wide success, and I believe it hasn't reached its full potential yet. In my view, the Leipzig message of green, just, and productive cities for the common good can be a powerful driving force for sustainable urban development on the ground. To enable this, we must put the Leipzig principles into practice. To do this, we must spread the word, and that is exactly what we are doing here today. In Germany, as we shall see, many towns and cities are using the Leipzig principles as a foundation for their local urban policy. I hope today's meeting can inspire cities and towns from my own country, but indeed throughout Europe to join in. It is the best way to make our citizens realize that the new Leipzig Charter works, and it can positively affect the day-to-day lives. In the Netherlands, we have been working in the spirit of Leipzig for years in our so-called city deals, our national urban partnerships in the Netherlands. In a deal like circular and conceptual building, public and private parties work together, circular bio-based ways of building. This is also a link with the European Bauhaus movement, another German-inspired initiative that will determine the future of urban Europe. And on a European level, we of course use and support the urban agenda for the EU, which was revitalized just a few weeks ago with the Ljubljana Agreement. Again, our minister was present and gave a speech focusing on the youth. And this is also a good example of our German-Dutch cooperations. We consulted each other very frequently, and Germany also supported our better regulation initiative. Finally, dear Erwin, we would like to congratulate you and your countrymen on the new government. Germany has recently formed, and indeed with incredible speed at which you did it, the new coalition agreement contains many aspects which we are greatly interested in, just as a separate ministry for the ambition to build and finance 400,000 houses per year, and a strong focus on climate sustainability and integrated digitalization. Our coalition agreement, which was actually made openly at 1:30, also places emphasis on green and digital transition and on building and housing, which offers an opportunity for further renewal of our cooperation as close neighbors, but as partners. And I read, because I was just reading, it came in at 1:30. So I read we have a minister for climate and energy, and we have a minister for housing and spatial planning. Those will be two new ministers. We don't know if there will be new ministries, but we do have two new ministers. And I'm still reading this. So ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention, and I wish you a fruitful policy lab. Mr. Chair, the floor is yours again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen van Dantzig and Erwin Schwärzer, for these nice words for your openings. And indeed, we are in the midst of very dynamic developments in both countries. So, well, the timing couldn't have been better, I guess. Congratulations also to both of you, actually. And with this, I would like to move to introduce the keynote and the keynote speaker that we are now going to enjoy, which is a personal and professional take by Frauke Burgdorff, building councillor in the city of Aachen, on what the new Leipzig Charter means for cities, for her city, Aachen, very close to the Dutch-German border, actually, and also what it means in the wake of global challenges, because, local challenges don't exist in their pure form anymore, really. Frauke Burgdorff is, well, at least partly responsible for a lot of the elements the new Leipzig Charter mentions in her city, so we're really curious to hear your take. And we also know of her that she is something like an ambassador of the new Leipzig Charter, at least in Germany and maybe also beyond, and with this Policy Lab, certainly also beyond. So Frauke Burgdorff, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much, Lea, for the warm introduction. Hello, everybody, and goedemiddag, zou ik zeggen, naar Rotterdam of waar ook. So I don't want to get the translators confused, and I'm not talking Dutch any longer. I'm really glad to be here as in my job as the head of planning in Aachen, but also as an ambassador of the Leipzig Charter and as an ambassador for the discussion about the common goods in Germany. So let me start, what is the Leipzig Charter and what is it not, maybe, but I will start with what is the Leipzig Charter. Europe is strong when its cities are strong, when they enable a healthy, peaceful, socially and economically good life for the citizens. Sounds small, but it's such a big issue. In view of the crises that will come and the tensions that will come, they were always reflected locally in the communities on the ground, and it is not easy to handle them at all. Anne-Kathrin Bohle, the former state secretary at the German Ministry of the Interior, puts it this way: none of the challenges of our time, be it migration, climate change, or pandemics, can be met without thinking about the living space of the city. What is important here is not a single department in a city, not a single specialized policy can achieve this goal. The demand for integrated and joint action by all policy fields is central in the Leipzig Charter and is central for our cities. For me, the Leipzig Charter is a core in its core a normative document. So it is not a practical guiding line, but it's a strong normative field that opens. It emphasizes the importance of the cities as a level of action and highlights them as essential to success of the European idea. It gives cities a framework of argumentation, it was already mentioned, for shaping locally integrated urban development. So not economics against social issues, against ecological issues. And it places the common good at the center of all decisions. And it gives the EU and the states the ability for a good legal and financial framework that we need for integrated spatial development. What is special about the Leipzig Charter for me as a head of planning? As I said, I'm particularly pleased with the emphasis on the common good, because if you take this concept, the common good, seriously, you also take seriously the processes of negotiation that are involved in creating the common good. Let me make it concrete. With every development plan that we write in our communities that is politically approved, with every piece of road, with every program that enables investment in neighborhoods and public spaces, we as public authorities organize advantages and disadvantages. We give one person the opportunity to build and deny another person a good view of the mountains. We give one person the opportunity to cycle safely and take away the opportunity to park on the doorstep of another. That sounds banal, but it's not at all. Because when we come to the question of who is entitled to profit, to the profits that the community organizes for the individual landowner, we are at a politically challenging and very relevant point in the debate on the common good, the land policy. Above all, this term, the commons, outlines the need to organize all the concerns of the city, economic, social, ecological, in a positive resonance. That means with each other and not against each other. So when we develop a new business park, for example, we must always ask ourselves directly how we use this development to simultaneously increase the climate resilience of the location and at the same time create the housing needed by the new workers. Of course, this does not always succeed in the purest form, but the Leipzig Charter also gives me a very practical opportunity to be able to make this demand for integrated thinking in the administration and in politics in the first place. And this with the backing of all European cities. So I'm not alone in Aachen. This is very important sometimes. The Leipzig Charter is, of course, much more specific than the acclamation of the importance of the common good. It identifies three central dimensions that we should focus on for the good future of European cities: the just city, the green city, the productive city. Let me start with the just city. In Aachen, as in all cities in Europe, there are neighborhoods where people with special problems live. There is a lack of money, good education, and harmonious coexistence, and maybe most importance, a lack of political power. We have to keep an eye on these neighborhoods in the Netherlands and in Germany and make sure that the living situation there improves and that the situation does not get worse. In concrete terms, of course, it is much easier to run a depot or a new thoroughfare or even a flight path through these neighborhoods or above these neighborhoods. This is because they usually have little political power and cannot defend themselves as well as other neighborhoods. The Leipzig Charter calls on us not to do this and, on the contrary, to offer better public spaces, better schooling, better housing precisely there. Now to the green city. Our cities want and need to contribute to meeting the Paris climate targets. This includes a courageous transport policy, immense investings in the building stock, and of course the new energy and heating networks that help reduce CO2 consumption. In parallel, however, we will also make our cities fit for the heat and cold waves and for the floods we have to reckon with. To do this, we need support at all levels of government because the municipalities cannot make this necessary investments on their own. But we also need convincing plans and strategies that give the private sector and the chance to join us on the necessary path towards climate protection and climate resilience. And I think the Leipzig Charter is the right paper to hand over to the private sector. And finally, the productive city. Economic prosperity in our cities is not only generated by the much noticed global cooperation. It is also, and above all, generated by small and medium-sized enterprises and has good and important roots in the young startups that emerge in the context of our university, especially in Aachen. We have a big university with 60,000 people who study there. Aachen, for example, is equally successful as a startup city. We are the 5th in Germany, and as a modern technology city, and as an industrial city at the same time, because we also produce chocolate in our city. So we not only produce brains, we produce chocolate as well. It is not easy to reflect the speed associated with the economic developments in urban space. So the economic realm is developing much faster than our cities. But we are prepared to do everything we can to ensure that local and global economy activity is fair, just, and successful, and not at the expense of poorer countries in the world, what is important for me too. For me personally, it is important as well that we also harness the energy of the local citizens for economic processes. Aachen has a tradition in this. There is a 20-year-old business association called Initiative Aachen, which has used its energy, among other things, to ensure that we could have a tram again. So it was a private sector invention to that we can discuss again the tram in our city. I would very much like my city to be even better and more innovative in the field of urban production, urban mining, urban agriculture, but we also need tasks for the future, you know. Here too, the Leipzig Charter provides me with the arguments for these goals. To the good end, ladies and gentlemen, all European cities are facing huge transformations right now. Climate change impacts the transformation of our inner cities, more aggressive debates between our citizens and us, economic inequality, and of course, global migration. The Leipzig Charter cannot solve these problems. It provides us with good arguments that integrated and multi-level planning and action is the only way to ensure the sustainable success of our cities. And above all, it gives us as European cities the chance to organize ourselves directly around a common set of values and goals without our states. Please use the Charter to shape things powerfully and to shape it together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frauke Burgdorff, for this very inspiring speech. I would certainly come up with a question on it. I see we have no questions from the audience yet, but the audience, if you would like to pose any question to Frauke Burgdorff, this is your time, this is your moment. We have about 5 to 10 minutes for this. But what I would actually like to know, Frauke Burgdorff, is you have referred to the new Leipzig Charter as an argumentation framework, right? I think that is a red thread in your speech. So I'm just curious, when was the last time you really used elements of the new Leipzig Charter to make an argument, to make a point, be it in your own city administration or be it, for example, in cross-border cooperation or international cooperation? Can you just make it a bit more tangible?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. We have a project here in Aachen we call the Büchel project, funded by the state as well, by national projects money. And we tear down a parking garage and we build up something new. But at the beginning, we didn't know what to build because the parking lot should have been torn down since 30 years, but now it's torn down. And then I started a discussion, an open discussion on about the future of this place in the heart of the city. And I always said, this is a common good. So we have a parking lot that we tear down and now we create a common good. And I want to discuss the future of this common good with the citizens of the city of Aachen and not only with developers, also with the developers, but not only with developers. And therefore I used the Leipzig Charter because I said in Europe, we European cities, we discuss our citizens not only as users of the city, but as investors of the city. If they invest time or if they invest money, whatever. So in this case, it was very important. And then I have another case. We have a new section where we want to build houses at the border of our city. And the plan is 25 years old too, and it doesn't take enough care of the green city aspects. And then I argue and said, okay, look at the Leipzig Charter, look at other cities. We have to take care of the green city aspects, and we have to renew this draft and even to start from new, because I think this is not anymore from this time. So for me, it is a strong document, not the only one. It's always important to look to other cities to show that in the Netherlands, to Belgium, or to German cities, but the Leipzig Charter is always the beginning of the discussion.
Yeah, let me take over. Frau Burgdorff, we see one question in the chat, and it's about the Just City. It's actually from our colleague within our network from Belgium, Jean-Marc Dubois. And he's asking, how do you concretely reinforce solidarity towards vulnerable people? And then more particularly from the municipality and between citizens. Jean-Marc was asking for some concrete examples of how this concept of the Just City actually works in practice. And what I mentioned, this is also one of the topics that will be at the core of the incoming French presidency. So it's apparently a theme which is very much of today. So please, could you give us some concrete examples of how to promote solidarity between citizens and also between the, let's say, local government and its citizens?
Yeah, I would try to. So we have one neighborhood in Aachen. It's not a neighborhood. It's a huge part of the city we call Aachen North. And there the people from the industrial sector live. Some poor people, some people that migrated in the last 40 years to Aachen. Some people who got lost on their way organizing their lives because the industrial sector changed so much that there's not enough working opportunity anymore for them. And we had a program, I think it lasted about 12 years, where we invested in school infrastructure and public spaces and in organizing the neighborhood itself. So we have community workers as well. So we can't organize everything with building. I think we need in these neighborhoods, we need community workers who help those people who want to change their life, or to work together to have a stronger voice. One important thing is this strong voice of this neighborhoods, I mentioned it, sometimes are not there because the politicians move to the better neighborhoods. And this is really a problem in Germany, that we need more policy making, people involved in politics in these neighborhoods, and we try to foster this as well. But there is no general draft of success for these neighborhoods. I think you have to go there, work with the people and find out the things that help the people, and you have to rebuild the public space because most of the people are living in very small apartments, and especially in the pandemic, it was very important that there were very good playgrounds, very good parks, and that the people could stay there and have a healthy and socially powerful life.
Yes, thank you very much for your answer. I see one more question in the chat, which is related to this notion of the common good, which will also be the topic of our next panel discussion. But perhaps it's a good moment also to ask it to you. You said you are, in a way, a fan of this idea of the common good, and I share that with you very much. So the question from Niklas Mieszkowski is actually, how do you integrate this notion of the common good in your sustainability, in your local sustainability strategy? Can you, there again, give us a few examples, please?
Yeah, I think very important is that you don't only talk about the common goods as a headline. You have to think about the substance of the common good discussion, and it is a good discussion. So it is a discussion about goods and not only about politics. So you have private goods, you have public goods, and you have common goods, and we have to discuss in our city, how do we work with these common goods that are paid by the city itself or by its citizens, and how do you find democratic pathways that the people feel that these goods are common and that these goods are not only paid by the taxes. So our good. We try this in the Büchel as well. The politicians decided that in the heart of this new small neighborhood in the old city, there's going to be a public space, and we try to find organizations by citizens that take care of this public space in the future. Maybe we'll find them. And I have had another project before I started here in Aachen. I had the pleasure to work for a good foundation, the Montagsstiftung, and we in Krefeld, nearby city here, developed the Nachbarschaft neighborhood Samtweberei, where we started with the foundation money, and now there is a civil society foundation that owns this building and this complex. So it's always about economics. It's not only about space. If we talk about the common goods, and we have to deal with the economic questions behind it. I think this is very important.
What is that? We will continue our debate on the common good, and I'm really very, very happy that we can actually do that, because I really think it's one of the more political aspects of this new Leipzig Charter. So I'm glad that you also addressed it very explicitly in your keynote speech. Let me ask you another question, not about the common good this time, but about these other principles of good urban policies, which are also mentioned in the new Leipzig Charter. I remember when we were discussing the new Leipzig Charter with European stakeholders, we were looking at those principles of good urban governance, and actually we even thought at one point in time to copy the old charter into the new one, with a few exceptions though. When we were looking at this issue of participation, we thought, well, the original Leipzig Charter talks about participation, but in the context of today, we should have a different view of participation and more, let's say, framing it also in a context of co-design and co-participation. Now, this, of course, this sounds wonderful, of course, and I think many people would comply with that. But how does that work in practice in your city, for instance? Perhaps there also you could give us a few examples how you really engage with citizens and involving them in co-creating policies and co-designing policies, because there indeed, as you said, with the common good, it's always a matter of negotiation. So how do you balance that? And of course, I can imagine that you could give different examples, for instance, about compact, sustainable urban development. Should it be more? Should it be less? How does that work in practice in your city?
I will step to another field. I will step to the mobility aspect of my work, because I'm responsible for organizing the change of traffic systems here in Aachen too. And it's quite interesting because we have a huge network of people concerned by the future of mobility here in our town, but I think in every city in Europe. And what we can do is we can organize our work as technicians and draw and outline good streets and then build the streets and then say, okay, everybody here is your new street. But it's not as easy as this, because there are many, many different interests on the streets: bicycle drivers, pedestrians, car drivers, bus drivers, whatever. So what we try to is to find paths through these different aspects of mobility and to bring the people together to co-design with us the streets of the future. It's not easy because we have technical aspects that we have to fulfill, but it's easier to talk with each other and with the citizens that we find the right design of the streets than to talk about each other or against each other. So I think we have some good examples in Aachen, and you find it on our YouTube channel. We use in the pandemic, we use YouTube as much as you do, I think, to explain, but also to discuss the future of our city, and not only to participate, but to go into co-creation processes as well.
And does this sometimes also lead to conflicts between the municipality and the citizens? Because it's not always it must be, right? How do you solve that, or how do you work with that, or with that idea of conflict? That would be interesting to know as well.
I have to admit we have multi-level conflicts. So we have the conflicts between the different street users, I would say, and we have the conflict between the citizens and the state or the city, whoever is up there. The only thing I find at the moment is transparency. So to show and to explain everything we do, and we always explain why we do the next step. And then to organize discussions about the different interest fields, because especially in concerning mobility, you always have the private interests, so not in my backyard interests, and you have the common interests. And sometimes I would say the same people would argue on their doorsteps, they would argue differently when it would happen in another neighborhood. So we as the city are responsible to organize fair dialogues. We are the only ones who can do this. It can't be done by the press. And even if the people are organizing themselves by their private interests, you don't have the common interests anymore. So we have to stay strong, be transparent, lead dialogues, and be strong, really, because sometimes people are not arguing fair anymore against us. So I or my colleagues here are really getting trained into conflict management, because this is a part of their work, and we have to get professionals. We have to get professional in this field.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Frauke Burgdorff, for this fantastic insight into well, your work, into the dilemmas that you also face. It was really, really insightful. Thanks also to everyone who asked questions. And with this, we will actually move to the first panel discussion, which is on the urban governance to ensure the common good. So more on this. Thanks again, Frauke. And now we have some more speakers to delve on this issue. And for that, I will hand back over to Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Leah. We already mentioned this notion of the common good, and we already started in a way discussing it. Now, this was a topic that we did not discuss as much as I would have expected, to be honest, at the European level. Now, I know that in the German context, this notion of the common good in German has a very, let's say, it's well known to everyone. In German, it is called Gemeinwohl, which is a term which is a bit difficult to translate. I think in English it works quite well, common good. In French also, bien commun. But I must say in Dutch it's quite difficult. And I would like to award a prize for, let's say, participants who would find the perfect translation of this idea of the common good in Dutch. We have different words which come close but not really entirely fit. So I would say algemeen nut, etc. These words do not really apply. But what is the common good? If we look at the new Leipzig Charter, there is a summary of some of these public services which would fall under this idea of the common good. It's related to infrastructure, to public services and public welfare. You could also think of healthcare and social services, education, cultural services, housing, of course, a very hot topic today, but also water and energy supply, data, internet, open data, waste management, transport. These are all services that let's say, over the past 20 or even 30 years have become privatized to a large extent. And that raises again the question of local policies or even national policies for the common good. What does that mean in practice? I mean, if we privatize all these services to, let's say, to the private sector, what is the control of local government? I mean, these are issues that need to be discussed. And if we look at the new Leipzig Charter with this emphasis on policies for the common good, it might raise some questions and some dilemmas in practice. It means that cities have a certain responsibility to act in the interest of the common good. But at the same time, it also means that they need to be able to act. And here again, the new Leipzig Charter also talks about Handlungsfähigkeit, which is, again, a German term, but it means indeed that cities need to be capacitated in order to act. It means they need to have the means from the national level, but also for the European level, to act in this interest of the common good. So policies for the common good bring about potential dilemmas and conflicts, as we already just heard. Cities would need to safeguard these common goods in a strategic and forward-looking way. But how to do that? I mean, that's the real question of the panel that we will be starting in a minute. But let me briefly explain how we're going to do that. We have a lineup of different speakers, and all of them will first receive some questions individually, and then we'll move over to a joint discussion. And again, I'm happy that we already saw some questions in our Q&A, so I would like to continue to promote this idea. So please add your questions in the Q&A section, and then we will pick them up as we already did. And with that short introduction, I hand over again to my colleague Leah to introduce the first speaker, which you already see.
Exactly. We are moving to southern Germany, indeed, and to Ludwigsburg more precisely. Albert Geiger is with us as the City Administration Director at the Citizens Office on Building in the city of Ludwigsburg. Welcome. And well, we know your city is much involved with the common good and has a local approach to making this common good work in its urban development planning. So just explain a bit, please, Abid Geiger, how this works in your city, and also in what way the new Leipzig Charter plays a role here.
Yeah, hello everybody. I send you many greetings from Ludwigsburg. Ludwigsburg is a middle-sized city. Nearly 100,000 people are living there. And we are situated in the region of Stuttgart, where we have 3 million people. And we allocated the German Sustainable City Award in 2014. And I'm so happy that we have the common good in the Leipzig Charter. And I fight for it for a few months in a discussion before the Leipzig Charter too. And a big argument was we have no words in Europe, in other countries for the Gemeinwohl. And so I'm happy that we have now common good, and I hope in every country of Europe we find a special description of what we mean. We started in 2004 with a process to describe our development goals in a master plan for 11 fields of action, and our goal was to become a sustainable city. Today we know that we have to go this way also in the future. We are not at the end, and I think when I see the young ladies here on the scene, I think we have to do it for a long time. I hope we will come to a goal. Facing the big global changes, and we described these challenges in 2004, and I think they are very current. In 2004, we said climate change, migration, demographic change, globalization, digitalization, etc. are big challenges, and we as a city of Ludwigsburg were convinced that if the world becomes more complex, we should do all steps to search solutions for the questions with an ambition participation. And we did it and do it still today in future conferences and other possibilities to talk to the people in the city. Therefore, we developed a logical path to the integrated process, and we saw in 2007 that also the Leipzig Charter had these main elements of our path. First, in Ludwigsburg, we had the agents, administration, councillors, and citizens. Second, the issues, strategic issues in all 11 fields of action. And we linked them strongly to the common good for all the people in the city. Our objective, cities for humans. The third, the importance of culture. Municipalities must set an example for a culture of estimation. A culture of estimation as a basic issue for the social cohesion. For the administration, that means that they must not only look for a good organizational structure, but they also must develop a culture of estimation. Because no matter how big a city is, they are the driving force of integrated sustainable development. We must realize we are in a big transformation, and our task is not let it run unchecked. In this context, Leipzig Charter 2007 and 2020 are essential, important milestone documents. They give the same description of challenges and solutions as we worked with at city level. So Leipzig Charter is an important guideline which describes the DNA of the European city. where the common good is the main goal.
But Geiger, yeah, this really sounds like an all-encompassing approach to not only the common good, but also using the new Leipzig Charter. So that is of course one of the reasons why we were happy to have you here, sharing this with other cities. And I would like to move with the second question to you, to a more concrete project, which we also found very fascinating, and it's the pop-up Innenstadt, the pop-up city center project. Can you just explain a bit what this project entails and what it has to do with today's topic?
My experiences in all our cities, in all our countries, the way from concept to realization is too long. We know so much and do so little. And there are so many arguments to wait and wait, no money, the others shall do it, we need to discuss it more exactly, what will the people think, and so on, so on. Pop-up Innenstadt Ludwigsburg is an example to break this wall, to break this rule. Pop-up City Center Ludwigsburg from 2021 to 2023 means temporary measures to improve mobility, climate adaptation, upgrade and revitalize public space, and give back space in the city center to the humans. Pop-up thinking is crucial. Parking spaces used to be where people from the urban community now spend time. Not cars enjoy the sun. People do it. Not cars are the noise of the street. People are speaking to each other, are singing, laughing, crying, and they sense the city in a new way. I'm convinced more daring to experiment is needed. Courage is the current topic for us.
Thank you.
Yes, let me take over now and introduce our next speaker in the panel, and that's Ufuk Kâhya. He is alderman and vice mayor for a wide political portfolio, including sustainable mobility, talent development, but also welfare in the city of 's-Hertogenbosch, which is the full original name, also called Den Bosch. Ufuk Kâhya, I would like to ask you to briefly introduce yourself and then immediately to focus on this issue, on these issues of urban governance for the common good, and how that works now in a Dutch city, like the city of Den Bosch in your city. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on this policy lab, which is in the most important time. As previous speakers said, we have a government in Germany, we have a government in the Netherlands. So I think today is the day that the Leipzig Charter should translate from a wonderful promise in paper to concrete actions from our national governments that are going to enable cities to use their transformative powers for the common good. So I'm a vice mayor and alderman in 's-Hertogenbosch, but I'm also a member of the European Committee of the Regions, in which these issues are being discussed almost on a weekly basis. And I see in my city that if we truly, and I have the charter here, which says common good by including general welfare, reliable public service, but also reducing and preventing new forms of social, economic, environmental, and territorial inequalities. And it states that no one should be left behind, which is a very important promise. Just a few hours ago, the new Dutch government was being announced, and the chair of the national parliament said that this government should regain the public's trust in politics. And the question is, how can we do that? By basically uplifting and making sure that what we promise in the Leipzig Charter is implemented. Because if we can face the housing crisis, the climate crisis, and all those challenges by inclusive policies that enable common good, that left no one behind, we can get there. So in my city and in my broad package of issues, I see that we should reinvent how we govern in the 21st century. I'm a vice mayor now for 3 years, and in these 3 years, I experienced the relationship of municipalities with the national government like a relationship of an old couple who is bickering all the time on small issues like who is going to do the dishes. And more importantly is how can we get all the children fed? So I would say, instead of having the discussion on which ministry is responsible for what, I should say how are all ministries, all municipalities, all fields are going to contribute to those challenges. So how are social policies helping climate change and more healthy and happy years? How is, for example, I'm responsible for transportation. How is how we set up transportation going to help create inclusive cities in which everybody can participate and get from A to B in a safe way, in which your economic status or your physical inabilities are not excluding you in taking part of the social life, work life, educational life in the city. So this is my short pitch. I hope I answered your question.
It's a nice pitch, and it's also a perfect bridge to my follow-up question, and basically. And it's interesting that you pick this aspect of the Leipzig Charter, which also refers to one of the Sustainable Development Goals, which are behind us indeed, and where it is literally also stated that no one should be left behind. Now, indeed, today, especially in the Netherlands, this is a day of political messages, and let's continue a bit with that, because after all, you are a real politician. Again, going back to this new Leipzig chart, it talks a lot about the integrated approach, and this is something that we have been talking about also within this European framework for many, many years. It has become part of also, let's say, the policy rhetoric that is reiterated over and over and over again. You mentioned it briefly. So I would like to ask you if you can give us some very concrete examples of where this notion of integrated policies, of bridging the need to bridge political silos, actually does not really work well in practice. And then, of course, the big question is, and this is your moment also to give some political messages to the new government, what should be changed to really, let's call the term, let's use the term of the Leipzig Charter again, to really make optimal benefit or optimal use of this transformative power of cities?
Yeah, so I wouldn't really want to send a political message. I mostly want to say, hey, I want to help achieve those goals, but to be able to help as a local government, as a city, I should be enabled, because the political silos are real, the Excel sheets are real, how budget is allocated is real. And I think if we talk in the Leipzig Charter about the transformative power of cities, that lies in the intersection of those silos, that lies in the intersection of different policy fields, in the intersection of those budgets. So can I use my budget for healthcare to also create a healthy living environment? Can I use my budget for infrastructure to enable people to participate in society in a more healthy and constructive way? So that's the main question, I think, with the Leipzig Charter, because we indeed everywhere we say we want to work more in a more in an approach that integrates everything. We should co-create with a bunch of different fields, but in the end, if I have to take decisions, I have to fill in this financial paragraph, and I have to report to the national government, etc., etc. And then I have the accountants checking my books, and it's all fine and fair game. But it doesn't enable me to really use the transformative power that lies within the field that we have. I cannot use my students and my companies and my NGOs to really collaborate and create projects that think out of the box, because when I want to realize them, I'm being checked by all these boxes.
Thank you very much, Ufuk. We'll come back for the general discussion. I would like to move now to our next speaker, who is also from the Netherlands, and that's Bert Moormann, who is also at a very practical level working in the field of housing and care. You're director of the housing corporation called Domesta in a, well, let's say mid-size city in the Netherlands, in the north of the country. Now, in your region, you have a specific term which comes in a way close to this notion of Gemeinwohl in German, and that's called Noberschap, Bert Moormann. Perhaps not everyone, especially not, I would say, the German and other non-Dutch well, let's say participants in this webinar would know what that means. But what is this notion of Noberschap and how does it relate to the common good?
Yes, thanks, Martin. You pronounce it very good. I never heard anyone beyond this this region pronounce the word Noberschap as well as you did. So my compliments for you. Yeah, Noberschap is actually a very old value that people take care and look after each other. It's what you basically can expect from citizenship. I think other than in high density cities, here more in the rural area, people are should rely on each other, and also in terms of society buildings, community centers. That's the word where I was looking after. Community centers are run by people. So what we saw in the financial crisis, that budgets on care and housing were cut back. The care was transformed from the central government to the local government with reasonable cutbacks. And also in the housing area, we faced a big fiscal claim. So we need to pay taxes over social housing. That movement in the transformation, care housing was no longer available for elderly people. In a situation where the 80 plus people double the next 20 years. So we have to find new solutions where in the years behind the decennia behind us, the government took care of our elder people. We now have to do it ourselves for a large amount. So Noberschap is actually very actual again. You see new initiatives where it's difficult for us as an institution to work together with initiatives from people to arrange our own care and housing for themselves. So there's a new collaboration between people, and only people living in the cities here and in the areas around Emmen, and the institutions as we are. And you see nice innovations popping up in new housing concepts where house owners and house renters live together and look after each other. So it's an inclusive society that we are after. So we no longer need to rely only on the government. We also take care of it ourselves. And that's the old value of Noberschap comes back.
Yeah, indeed. But talking about the government, we see that housing and care are indeed public goods under pressure, very much so. If you would say, if we talk about innovative solutions, I mean, how could we also bridge this silo thinking, talking about housing and care? What would be your suggestion to innovate also public policies for the common good in that perspective?
Yeah, if you look at the business case, formerly a house in a care location would cost the government about 800 euros a month, while the same person living in that same building at this moment pays 600 euros a month. And so the government saves 200 euros per client, per citizen per month. So that's a good business case for the government. On the other hand, that money is needed for a safe building, for also social meeting and buildings. So from the housing perspective and from the living together perspective, we need that money. And also my colleague from Den Bosch stated it, if I can make one business case where prevention in care are in one hand, we can build fantastic buildings for people to live together and save on care costs, for instance.
So indeed, this is something where the different spreadsheets would need to be combined to let's say, to facilitate also the kind of work that you are doing. I think it's time to hand over to you, Leah, to introduce the next speakers. Thank you very much, Bert.
Indeed. Finishing up this round of introduction, we would like to move now to Münster, the city of Münster, also in North Rhine-Westphalia, and to a very special project called Hansa Forum. Leonie, Nienhaus and Celina, Segsa are the two representatives of Hansa Forum in Münster. Welcome to you two. So you work in this special project. Can you tell us a bit more about it? And also what it has to do with the common good, the famous Gemeinwohl.
Yes, for sure. So first of all, a warm welcome to everybody also from our side. Thank you for having us here. We both work in the Hansa Forum, which is a pilot project supported by the National Urban Development Policy in Germany. And as a part of it, we got a funding over 700,000 euros for 3 years, which ends in the end of December this year. And institutionally, we belong to the B side, which is a big collective that aims to establish and keep free spaces for the civil society in an area which is marked by gentrification processes. Our heart or home project is a harbor house that will become a socio-cultural center for the neighborhood and the whole city. And actually the house is under construction and we'll open it in 2023 with affordable studios for artists, musicians, and an open living room for everybody without pressure to consume and many more things. And this approach to build a house for and by many people, we transformed in our project to a whole neighborhood. So we treated the neighborhood as a house. And in our neighborhood called Hansaviertel in the German city of Münster, we wanted to secure the common good by answering the following question by its inhabitants. What do the people in the neighborhood want for a good life in the neighborhood? And what is important for good development in this area? And here we see two principles of the Leipzig Charter being realized. First, we address the people in its immediate living space because it is easiest to get involved here, and here people are capable to cope with local challenges and also global challenges. And the second principle of the Leipzig Charter that we pursue is to participate all the people in the neighborhood, so the people who are living there, or the ones who are working there, and the ones who are feeling a strong connection to this part of the city. And by this process, we established the quite complicated neighborhood community well-being index, which is in German the Quartier-Gemeinwohl Index, the QGI. Yes.
Okay, well, that makes me curious. If you're talking about a neighborhood development and then you bring in an index, you need to tell us a bit more. How is this index created, and what does it tell you in the project, and what does it tell the local community?
So in general, as Leonie said before, the Neighborhood Community Index points out which topics with regards to the common good are important to the people living in our quarter, or the people that have a strong connection to the quarter. In general, it is divided into various topics such as education and aging in the neighborhood, networking, climate positivity, or mobility, and several more, as there are 16 topics right now. And these topics or themes are elaborated through a text and an illustration. And the text is formed by an utopian vision for the future, which leads to the common good, or can lead to the common good for such a topic such as education, for example. And this text is then supported by an illustration for a better understanding of what education means in terms of the common good for the Hansaviertel. How it was formed or developed was together with the quarter and the people that live in the quarter.
So that was done by the Hansa Convention, which is a convention where randomly selected people from the neighborhood come together to discuss important topics for the Charter and to discuss project funding and to decide on project funding. But to do that, in the beginning, there needed to be a decision-making base, which is the Quartiergemeinwohl-Index, which was decided on and created on the first and second Hansa Convention, where the people that were there talked about topics that were important to them for the Charter and needs that they had. And in small working groups, they developed it further. And on the second Hansa Convention, they decided that the current index is ready now and can be used. And how it is used now is that projects that we have can be drawn out of the index as it shows needs for the Charter. And also that the Hansa Convention and the Hansa Committee, which we have, that decides on the project funding, make their decision based on this index so that the projects are oriented towards the common good. And I think one thing that is very important for us to stress is that this index is not fixed, that it's a livability index kind of, that it's flexible and that needs to change with the Charter. So if the Charter changes and the demographics changes, certain topics that we have now might not be useful anymore, and then some topics are removed or some can be added onto it. So it needs to be constantly changed and developed.
Thank you. Well, it's fascinating how you created this out of the neighborhood for the neighborhood, and then also put it to use. That's maybe something we can also discuss when opening this panel, because that's actually what we would like to do now, to get everyone together and to enable some broader exchange between all the speakers, but also the audience. I'm going to hand over to Mart for the questions from the audience.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. Well, here it starts, I would say, because looking at the chat, I see the first question about this notion of the common good already. I don't know exactly to whom it is addressed, but okay, it's a question by Peter Austin, who is neither from the Netherlands nor from Germany, and he is writing in the chat that he is a bit confused now of how this notion of the common good is used. It might be a question indeed for Leonie Nienhaus and Celina Segsa, because he is asking how widely is this notion of the common good actually defined? Is it at the local level, the regional level, or even the global level? And is there even a risk of it becoming a label of convenience? And how can it be measured, and how will this be measured? Perhaps you could respond to that, please. Go ahead.
Yes, of course. So we're talking about the local level here. We are situated in a quarter in Münster, the Hansaviertel. So our community wellbeing index is for the quarter or a neighborhood that is defined. And in general, this is something that we decided on that is most likely to be useful right now to do that on the local level, as those decisions and developments mostly concern the people the closest, and they're mostly connected with it. And I think there's, for us, as I said before, there's no risk or no big risk of convenience, because we develop it constantly, and it changes as we want to open up the discussion in the Charter about the common good and about the index. And so we want to have a discussion and a critical discussion about it and want to change it accordingly to the Charter. And it's also important, it's called an index, but it's very qualitative. So it consists of words and an aim for the future that we want to reach with projects. So it's measured by the projects that are funded, and then we measure how the projects that are funded added to this common good vision that we've established.
Now, one of the ideas of the policies for the common good is this not leaving anyone behind, leave no one behind, actually, which is also part of the new urban agenda at the global level. Now, the question from Jean-Marc Dubois is actually, this principle should be the guideline for all policies in all cities. And I would assume that every one of you would comply with that. But it might also mean that the impact of, let's say, policies making sure that no one is left behind should be evaluated ex ante, as Jean-Marc Dubois is suggesting here. Now, a question to all panelists, basically, is, do you apply such practices in your own city? Who would like to take this first question from the panel? Anyone of the local authorities? Ufuk Kâhya, perhaps, from your city, Den Bosch?
Sure. One of the things that we do to enable that nobody is left behind is that we invest in an unequal way. So one of the Leipzig Charter's hopes and prospects is to not create and reduce inequalities on all these fields. And to do that, we must invest more or in different ways in certain areas or towards certain groups than sometimes we should. So let's say, for example, the energy prices skyrocketed, and the national government's idea was, let's give everybody a few $100 and then we solve the problem, which creates an even bigger gap of inequality in society than really closing it. So I think, especially on the local level, we should have the courage to make choices of unequal investment and policies that are not spread out in the entire municipality, but really micro-target neighborhoods and solutions.
Clear, very clear answer. Thank you, Ufuk Kâhya. We have another question, again, actually directed to Leonie and Celina, by Niklas Miszkowski, who asks if there have been any trade-offs or conflicts between the neighborhood index and the city's agenda.
It's hard to say, but we would say no, because we collaborate with the city in the Hansa Committee, which consists of representatives out of the politics, the administration, and also the inhabitants. And yeah, we are also a project that follow the Münster agenda, Münster 2030-50, which is an agenda for the future. And yeah, so there are no big conflicts. The bigger conflicts are, for example, in our neighborhood gentrification processes. And this is, for example, a good topic where we can talk with the city about, and also the ones who are responsible for it. For example, employees out of the living business, housing business. Yeah.
Well, good to hear. You know, there doesn't have to be conflict everywhere. Actually, another your index is being discussed in the chat or in the Q&A vividly. Ralph Philipp Stern asks where the QGI, this index, can be viewed, and what are the definition of its details of these 16 themes that you mentioned.
Well, it can be viewed on our website and also in the quarter, but you will not be able to see that now. And in general, I think the question was how the topics were formed and how they were, how the text was written, probably. And we did that in work groups with the people that were randomly selected from the quarter in the first session. And then they formed those texts and talked about, if we have a topic, education, what is important for us for education for the quarter in the coming years. And they talked about this, formulated a text, formulated indicators that were important to think about for a development that is going to be there in 5 years or so. And this is how each topic was formed and developed further. And I hope that was the answer to the question.
Yeah, thank you for answering. Let's move now to, let's say, the more aspects of urban policy principles. Frauke Burgdorff, in her keynote speech, mentioned that this idea of the common good is a way to negotiate and to deal with conflicts and to deal with dilemmas. I would like to hear from the city representatives, actually, some very concrete examples of how you have been struggling with these dilemmas in your attempt to, let's say, to implement policies for the common good. Perhaps we should start here with some of the German cities, Ludwigsburg, for instance. I mean, how does this work in practice? I mean, focusing on different clash of interests, perhaps, and how to use this notion of the common good as described in this new Leipzig Charter to further promote your, let's say, or to implement your local policies.
Yes, if you look to the objectives of our Sustainable City Development Plan, then you see that it is full of dilemmas, and so also in the neighborhoods. We have more dilemmas than you can think of. And our solution after 15 years of work in this case, we decided that since last year we have in every neighborhood, our neighborhoods are in the size of for about 10,000 people, has a responsible person in the administration. And this person has to look like a pilot in a cockpit, what is happening in this neighborhood. The person is responsible to call a team from different parts of the administration if he or she see a problem. And then with the people from the neighborhood and the people from the administration, we make a workshop or different possibilities. The most time we go to the neighborhood and meet the people in a bar or on a place or in a kindergarten, for example, and talk with them about problems. And then when we see a solution, then we go to our council and discuss with them, always in the framework of our sustainable city plan. Discuss with the councillors, do we have money to solve the problem, or must we find a person who makes street work, or some different possibilities. But the main point is our experience is we need one responsible coordinator, call it coordinator. Not he's not a street worker, or he's not a special man for building. We need a coordinator who scan the things who happen in or which happen in the neighborhood.
I know that there are similar initiatives also in Dutch cities. So, Ufuk Kâhya, how does this work in your city? I mean, I was thinking myself of this notion of the urban marines, for instance, in the city of Rotterdam, which is a bit of a military metaphor. But how do you allow concrete access between, let's say, local government and citizens to solve concrete problems in your city?
So in the city of 's-Hertogenbosch, we have two interventions. One is called a neighborhood manager, so a public servant who's responsible for whatever is happening in a neighborhood and has also the mandate to go through the silos and through the different departments of the municipality to make sure that things work in the neighborhood. And to make sure that projects happen in an integrated and well-balanced way. And the second thing that we did is we have citizen councils in neighborhoods, and they get a yearly budget, and they can and people from the neighborhood can come up with ideas and proposals, and they are the ones allocating the budget to make sure that those projects are being realized and implemented. And it can be anything, and that works quite well in some neighborhoods. But there's also a challenge because who is participating in the kind of settings that we are creating, because it's not always inclusive for all kinds and types of people. So how can we create also different ways of participation and co-creation? That's one of the struggles that we are in right now.
Sure. Well, this idea of neighborhood budget is quite familiar to German cities, actually. I mean, they experimented with that already many, many years ago. Talking about those budgets, how big are the budgets, for instance, to give us a bit of an idea?
So it depends on the size of the neighborhood, but it's up to a few €100,000 a year.
I think what is interesting, and perhaps here our German colleagues could give us some examples of how this works in practice, because what I remember from other policy labs in the past is that once you give the citizens also, let's say, the power in a way to decide upon where should I put my money? Should it be in a public school or a road? And sometimes I know that in German projects, these are the concrete decisions that citizens, that neighborhoods, people living in neighborhoods can make. That it is actually quite complex. I mean, what are the experiences in Ludwigsburg or in your city, Leonie and Celina? In Münster, sorry.
In Ludwigsburg, we have a budget for about €5,000 per neighborhood, and that's an amount where the people can have small projects, and our experience is that it's very good to bring the people together, to have some nice discussions, and also they can see, for example, meetings for children in holidays and so on. And then, as you described, we have participation for the bigger projects, so that the people in the neighborhoods can also discuss if we have to build a street or a new meeting point or so.
Yes, thank you. And let's move to Münster. How does that work in Münster?
So far as we know, our city don't have a budget, but we created a budget by ourselves, €200,050 for the people, and the people in our quarter, they also decided about the sum, as Celina mentioned, in the Hansa Convention and also in the Hansa Gremium, and there were like small projects between 25 and €250, middle class project between 250 and 2,500, and the biggest projects that could get money out of this budget were around 2,500 and 25,000 euros. So yeah, the power came from the people, and the people decided where to give it.
Yeah, so you're actually referring to relatively small budgets. Perhaps at the end, Erwin Schwärzer can tell us a bit more about the different sizes of these neighborhood budgets in quartiers management, that it is called in German. But I must say, we're approaching the end of this panel discussion already. I'm sorry about that. I mean, we could have easily continued for another couple of hours. So it is about time now to close the first panel and to allow you also for a break, which is indeed important if we are looking at, if you are watching a webinar, it's good also to stretch your legs a bit. And we will resume exactly in 15 minutes. That means at 10 to 4, we will resume. So please do stay connected. Of course, you can turn off your video and your audio, and we will come back in 10 minutes to 4. Thank you very much, all of the participants, for joining us in the panel, and we'll resume with the second panel after the break. Thank you very much.
Welcome back, everyone, from this well-deserved short, we know, break, but we are moving to the last hour of our event. And just as before, we have a discussion with panelists, and the setup will also be the same. First, introducing everyone, asking a set of questions to them so they get to present themselves. And afterwards, we will try and have a lively discussion as long as we can. So again, if you have questions in the audience, feel free to pose them at the moment they pop up in your head and put them in the Q&A section, preferably in English if you can. So this panel is about digitalization in the wake of the pandemic. A bit of a dramatic title. But we didn't want to only talk about digitalization, but we really wanted to link it with the situation we're currently all facing and what it means for urban development and urban design. What does the new Leipzig Charter say about this topic? Well, it says quite a lot because a 2020 document cannot not talk about the digital sphere. And about digitalization as a major transformative and cross-sectoral trend affecting virtually all dimensions of sustainable urban development. So be it about mobility, participation, commerce, public space, all of this is deeply affected by digitalization. And the New Leipzig Charter also states that this does not only bring potentially, enormous societal benefits, but it also bears the risk of new divides in society and of new inequalities and challenges. So, well, digital networks and information systems, well, we know they are a key infrastructure for the common good. If you are not connected these days, you're really out of public life. And that is also relevant to fulfill, your role as an urban citizen, for example. And then thinking about the pandemic and what it has done, and to what extent it has maybe increased the ongoing trends around digitalization that we had already seen, like changing mobility patterns, being able to work from home, at least a part of society was able to do that. It is still doing that. The fact that we're standing here is a bit of an exception for us, in fact. And also new needs of people, new inequalities maybe, that have been made visible by the situation that we're in. And as in the panel discussion we had earlier before the break, again, the role of cities in shaping this digital transformation is really key, and especially the capacity to act for cities, the Handlungsfähigkeit. And this is something we would like to discuss with a couple of distinguished speakers, and starting actually with Pierre Golz from the city of Herne. Pierre Golz, you are Chief Digital Officer and Director of Herne Digital in Herne. So we know that your city is doing a lot in this field. So just fill us in. What is it that Herne is doing? What are your ambitions regarding digitalization? But also, how has the pandemic maybe affected or changed your ambitions or your approach?
Yeah, Leah, thank you for your introduction. First of all, I would like to welcome you all to this panel discussion. Thank you for the possibility to talk about the strategy of the city of Herne here in this meeting today. First of all, I would like to say Herne is a city in the center of the rural area. So we are surrounded by big cities. We have 160,000 citizens. The rural area in Germany has round about 5 million people who are living in this area. And the city is in change. It's industrial change, the cultural change. The industry was focused on coal, for example, in the past. The last coal mines closed, for example, I think 13 years ago. So the city had to change. And now the pandemic was, quite interrupting the strategy we gave us in the year 2018. It is called Herne 2025 Urban Digital International. Those were the new leading messages for our development of the city. And the pandemic did not interrupt us as well as some other structural changes in the past, because the strategy we gave us, we are convinced that it is a good point for the future to invite citizens, to invite companies, for example, building an ecosystem based on those citizens, companies, the public sector, and research. So we were searching for research units, for example, universities of applied science. We are surrounded by them to make some projects together and creating new ecosystems based on research, digital transformation, and development. And this was the strategy for the last years. And now we are talking about building new structures. For example, we have made some organizations, for example, the Ideas Forum EV, to discuss with companies, with economy, with citizens, the future of the city. That was the main point. So we were allowed to solve the changes of the COVID situation together with the people here in Herne and surrounding us.
You're talking already about partnerships and this creating this ecosystem and this network with different partners on the ground. Can you just explain a bit more in detail how that works? I mean, how do you build such partnerships? How, did you need to do it from scratch when creating your strategy, or were they all already there? And also, how do you make that link to civil society? How do you make them part of your partnerships?
So first of all, we made some discussions with the citizens. We had a look at the strategy of the European Commission, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals, the strategy of Germany, and so on. And then we said, okay, we made a classic SWOT analysis, you know it. And then we said, okay, there are the chances, there are the risks. And now we want to talk to the citizens and the companies here, what we should do the best. And then we made some workshops with citizens, with the mayor. It was a large process, up to 6 or 8 months we forced. And at the end, there was the strategy Herne 2025 Urban Digital International with 6 so-called areas we want to force to fix projects in. For example, climate protection, innovation and research, education. It's a very big point for the moment, not at least from the last months of COVID. We started, for example, to digitize educational sector, I think 2 or 3 years ago. And we had mostly tablets, fiber to the schools, wireless activities, but that's just the infrastructure. We wanted to change the mind. I think that's the most important point. Infrastructure is important to give the, I don't know the word for the moment, Werkzeug, the utilities to the people to solve the problems, but you have to change the minds. And so we wanted to change education here, for example, to invite every citizen, every company to build this ecosystem together to solve the problems and getting out of this pandemic with speed.
Yeah, with speed. That's, I think, what we're all wishing for. Thank you, Pierre Golz, for this introduction. Moving on for the moment to the city of Oldenburg and to Friederike Hackmann, who is also working on digitalization and on not only changing the infrastructures, but also changing the minds, I believe. So Friederike Hackmann, could you just please introduce your city briefly, but also your activities around digitalization? Obviously, that's what we're talking about. And also if the pandemic has changed anything in your approach in Oldenburg.
Thank you very much, Leah, also for having me here today. Now, Oldenburg is a city of about 170,000 people. We are currently involved in trying to create new living space. We are very fortunate to have an old military air base that is not there anymore and is being torn down, and that we can use to create a completely new quarter of the city. So one of the things that is very important to us is participation. Make sure citizens can be involved in urban planning. And this is not just new quarters of the city, but also, for instance, we're going to build a new city museum for our city history, etc. And normally those approaches would be have a model, have people come there, talk about it, have an opinion. And in our digital strategy, we have two main elements. One of them is e-government, related to, it's a wonderful name, the Online Zugangsgesetz, which claims that by the end of 2022, essential services need to be available in digital form to citizens. And I would translate it like online access law. Essentially, if you have a dog and you want to pay taxes for it, you should be able to fill in the form online and send it that way. And the other aspect that we have in our strategy is the smart city strategy, which is about open data, as I mentioned, about participation. And the thing I'm personally working on is research, specifically in digital labs. And the one I'm working for is about city planning and how to use digital mediums and technologies to help people get involved. Because one of the issues we have in our cities is that people who get involved, and I'm not saying their opinion doesn't matter, but they are 60 years or older. And if we want to have a city that's ready for the future, for the younger generation, and give them the feeling that what they say matters, we need to address them sort of on eye level. So what we're working on is developing tools, which one of them is an augmented reality app that essentially you can do participation in the field. Let's imagine there is an area where you want to build a new museum, for instance. You can hold up your phone and you can look at the different versions of the museum and then decide what you like, what you don't like, etc., and basically participate right there. And the part I'm working on specifically is make sure that the citizens have the capability to use these tools. So we've created different formats, some kind of to test participation and some to test them for whether they're able to help people increase their competence in digital matters. And these were, for instance, scavenger hunt to also get a feel for the city, for space, and kind of digitally approaching that. We did hackathons as a way to do participation. We did an augmented reality app to look at historical monuments in a historical garden. And we are working on creating a network of sort of IT helpers for elderly people or people who need support, who can then help them with their regular, everyday, run-of-the-mill IT problems. And regarding the pandemic, what really changed for us was that a lot of things happened very fast, which I think is very good. Essentially, lots of people now are able to work from home. We have a lot of hardware regarding, like, I have a laptop. I'm so happy I have a laptop. But essentially, we can work from home. We have webcams. We have these little things, and also a lot of the internal processes that normally you'd have to print, to sign, etc., have now become digital. So one of the major things that I also go along sort of with the online access law is that a lot of the concepts that would have been in paper form before are now already digital and kind of a bit ahead of schedule in that way.
Yeah, sounds like indeed a lot has happened in a short period of time. Just one follow-up question on the legacy, or maybe just to put it more simply, impact of of what you've been working on, this Civic Data Lab. So you mentioned all these things that have happened and all the acupuncture-like small things you put in place, a scavenger hunt, an augmented reality application to get involved in the participation processes. So that sounds like really fascinating pieces of a puzzle. But how does that puzzle now look? And what do you feel is the lasting impact of this? And what is going to stay and what is maybe going to change regarding this lab?
So one of the things that we've realized, for instance, if we look at the format of hackathons, is that if they are in digital form or focused on digital topics, you already need people with a very high capability of working in programming, etc. So depending on how you use these tools that we looked at, they are either very suitable or not suitable at all. You have to think, sort of what we take out of this is that you have to remember to think from your target audience. So that means in some respect, because we couldn't actually start training people to help elderly people, I created an event series, which was in cooperation with museums to kind of bring events home to elderly people who felt alone, who felt disconnected. And we essentially delivered cake and sort of helped them learn to use tools like video conferences to participate in live, to participate and make it easier to speak to their family. And one of the things that we learned, and that is going to stay, is that you have to approach this from the needs of your audience. You can't go, what I can provide? You have to know what the audience needs. And in this case, we found out quite a lot of things of how to make this happen. And also institutionally, that you can actually make events digitally, like the one we're in right now. This would not have been possible or even thought of having been possible before. So that is definitely going to stay. And also kind of with other institutions, with museums that we worked with, they didn't know that we could do like a guided tour to people's living rooms from within their display rooms, etc. So those kinds of things, and also the networks and the exchanges that we had will definitely stay, I think. And one of the things I hope stays, especially for people with disabilities, is the accessibility of culture. That it's easy to be in your home if you can't leave or if you can't travel long distances, and you can still access culture. So one of the things I hope stay around is this accessibility, both in events, but also in access to cultural goods. And one of the negative sides, unfortunately, that we hope we work on, because there's also something we learned, and I hope something we remember, is that depending on your infrastructure, having access to good internet, to possible to devices that can use the internet, as well as overcoming language barriers, are all things that are very, very important. And that if you want to reach, again, your target audience, your citizens, the people that live in your city, you have to make allowances for this. You have to make sure the infrastructure is there. And also, if they can't afford certain devices, that maybe there is like a library for them, that you can rent them from the library for a specific amount of time. So I hope those things will remain in the minds, but I think those things that we discovered while working, especially with the cultural institutes, will definitely stay.
Thank you, Friederike Hackmann.
Thank you.
Very, very inspiring. And I think I'll hand over to Mart to introduce more speakers and to get more such inputs.
Well, definitely. It's time indeed now to move to a Dutch city. And I'm sure that Frans Jorna, who will be our next panelist, he is the executive board member, but in this perspective, quite relevant, also the director responsible for service provision at the city of Apeldoorn, which is a mid-sized city, largely focusing on service provision as such. Frans Jorna, I would like to ask you to very briefly introduce yourself, but also to say a few words about this J40 Smart Cities network that we have in the Netherlands. J40 being the mid-sized cities, right? So what are the political priorities of the network, and how does your city of Apeldoorn actually positions itself within this whole field?
Well, just briefly introducing Apeldoorn. Basically, a city is the size of Oldenburg, Friederike. So 170,000 people and growing. Being a mid-sized city, with 1,350 colleagues. We 3-4 years ago acknowledged the fact that the task at hand
was too big. So all of these mid-sized cities are basically faced with the same challenges. How do you provide security if your entire city is wired, for instance? How do you enhance connectivity without compromising the privacy of our inhabitants? In terms of multimodal shifts within mobility, how do you actually provide for that? So the 100,000 plus cities in the Netherlands sort of took up a challenge by national government to translate the national smart city strategy into a bid by the 40 cities focusing on 6 core challenges. Well, I won't go through them all, but one is participation. A second one is improving the sustainability of our cities. A third one, and that's a theme that Apeldoorn adopted, is smart mobility, going from solutions to actually solutions that work. So the formula is scalability. The formula is not just stating that citizens are first, but actually involving citizens from the start in the way that we adopt these innovations, and tackling the intricacies of, for instance, public procurement and tendering. How do you go about establishing these innovative partnerships? So there are 6 lead cities. Apeldoorn is one of them, and we've taken up the challenges provided for us by national government, and are now in the process of translating that process into a national program.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Sorry, you want to continue?
That's a G40, yeah.
G40, exactly, yeah. Well, Hackmann already mentioned that a couple of things went so fast in the past more than 1.5 years, and then especially as a result of the pandemic, this whole digitalization have received quite a big push. So indeed, we mentioned that perspective very much also the pandemic as a catalyst for change. Now, this does apply very clearly also to this field of digitalization. I would like to ask you how your city actually deals with these disruptive innovations that are now getting this strong push. We see how it affects indeed our daily lives. You mentioned also mobility, but how you're dealing with that at the city level, really. I would like to hear a bit more about that, please.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I mean, let me first sort of focus on 4 core challenges that we were faced with about at the start of the pandemic, and then translate that into how it affects our smart city strategy. From the outset, we saw that the way that citizens wanted to move throughout the city changed immediately. So there was much more biking going around. We were in the middle of a public procurement for our buses scheme, and then that had to be revised. We saw that there was a need to allow for a much more positive green modal shift, moving away from cars to cycling and walking as much as possible. So that was one in the area of mobility. Secondly, Apeldoorn is considered a green city. I have the honor of having to care for 10 million trees, but greening the inner city, making that a place that feels good, that is green, that enhances health, is something quite different. And we saw that the public space was not managed to allow for such a sudden shift. The third one, connectivity. We have a good connectivity in terms of fiber to the home, etc. But the accessibility of it, in terms of an even distribution, open and accessible and affordable for everyone, something quite different. And the massive uptake from connectivity that was taking place as all of us were going home and we had to homeschool our children and they had to work from home, was something that we immediately recognized that the networks couldn't cope with that. And then the fourth shift was in terms of economy. Apeldoorn has always been an office town where lots of people working in insurance companies, for instance, or with the national registry. All of a sudden, all of these people went home. The old-fashioned landscape of offices was rapidly going out of sight. But there was the whole economy sort of hinged upon these people working in offices. So how do you deal with such an economic shift? Now, what I want to illustrate the effect on our strategy, I provided a slide on developments in our inner city. I hope you can see it. It's quite small for me. Yeah, good. This slide is available actually. Plus a strategy behind it. In here you see the yellow-green sort of line is an old canal, a canal that was made redundant about 20 years ago after a rapid shift, and since then it's been left largely abandoned. On it are spaces where old grey industrial areas aren't used anymore, and the canal is crossed by a national railway line, by various inner city car lanes, and we saw that the way in which people were using this canal and were using the national railways and were using these car lanes changed all of a sudden. So we inserted that into our new inner city mobility strategy and are working at it as of now together with the big employers in Apeldoorn, provide green on-demand mobility schemes to still go from the home, from the railway station to these places. That's one. A second one, greening the inner city. We brought back water. We brought that water into the inner city. Water that's with brooks going through the city that had disappeared from the inner city about 20 to 30 years ago, to provide for a much more active and enticing environment to stay there than was previously the case. To promote cycling, we connected our traffic lights in such a way that when the weather forecast is dire, the cyclists get priority over car drivers. So this involves AI, and it's automated so as not to encumber anyone with the cumbersome task of having to decide who's taking priority. So that's promoting cyclists. And on the slide, can you put it back? Just to name a last example. On the slide to the left, you see a large office area that's being redeveloped into a mixed housing, small retail, green area, so to speak, Herzberg Park. Because we see that the way that citizens live in Apeldoorn 5 years ago is very different from the way that they will be living in Apeldoorn in 5 years' time. Now, I mentioned connectivity. We were already discussing the necessity for having an open, freely accessible public Wi-Fi network. We sped up the adoption of that, and the Wi-Fi network was installed in the past 2 months and is going live these 3 weeks. Now you can imagine what public debate that stimulates. But we thought it was vital for everyone to have access to free and safe and secure Wi-Fi. So that's just an example of how we reacted in the development strategies of our cities to the rapid changes that we saw in the way that the inhabitants of Apeldoorn are living in our city.
Yeah, thank you. We'll come back to some of the aspects a bit later, but I would like to move now to the next panelist. You already mentioned mobility. Well, Anke Karmann-Woessner is the head of planning, the planning department in the city of Karlsruhe, which is very much also an automotive city. But in addition to that, she has been leading one of the so-called urban agenda for the EU partnerships on urban mobility. Anke Karmann, I would like to ask you as a first question, and we'll go deeper also into the topic of mobility, but first in a more general way, how do you ensure in your city of Karlsruhe that digitalization actually forces public welfare, and how do you avoid creating new inequalities among your citizens in the city of Karlsruhe? Could you please elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. And I think digitalization is always a cross-cutting issue in our project. And it's not that we point it out especially, it's just a part of the smart city strategy. And I would like to present you some projects that are really crucial for us. And you mentioned just at the beginning that we were one of the coordinators of the partnership mobility of the urban agenda process, and therefore Karlsruhe brought in its very long-standing expertise in mobility projects, also in digital projects, to connect the different modes of mobility. For sure, I think it's very usual today. And also, we in this respect, various projects and concrete measures were implemented in the objectives of the new agenda, as well as the urban agenda. And the success of our project is based on the active involvement of all relevant stakeholders. Therefore, we need and we use digitalization, but not only. It depends. Today it's more, but before it was much less. And I hope we come back to also the formats to don't need as much as digitalization as we need at the moment, to integrate regional and local authorities, private businesses, science and research institutions. And I think this is one of our very important points, that we are, as a city of 300 inhabitants, with a lot of research institutes, very famous and very important research institutes in the Rhine Valley, have a very good situation to conditions for companies and people to live here. And also for companies, I think this is one of the most topics. And I prepared one of these slides. Perhaps you can show it if it's possible, because it points out the three elements, the citizens' participations, and I would like to give these three examples. The spatial agenda is one of our most important strategic elements and goals to chart the city's spatial development. These include raising the quality of urban environment, safeguarding quality of life and living conditions, as well as future-proof work environments, enhancing the city's specific qualities, protecting climate-relevant landscape spaces, which is really crucial in the Rhine area, and promoting responsible and socially growth. And I think this is our big package. And the spatial agenda is the result of an intensive discussion over a lot of number of years, involving and innovative consultations, very different consultation processes. We show two of them, and it is the result of a long and intensive planning process with significant input from experts within the city administration, joining forces with external experts. And I think this is really the important thing, that these different measures of participation should be the main process in developing projects. And we have on one side the strategic project, but on the other side, it becomes more and more difficult to develop also the inner city projects, because the inner city projects are massively dominated by particular interests. And on the one side, we have to develop the inner city projects, but on the other side, the interests are very different to the interests we should have for our common goods. And the second is the tram train system and the city of the short distances. And there we are coming back to the COVID situation. We follow a very ambitious integrated mobility plan through a continuous and extensive participation process also. And the tram train system, it's quite unique for Karlsruhe because it runs very far in the region. It's a multi-level approach, and this is a network which can use the tram network as well as the Deutsche Bahn lines, and they enable interchange-free travel from the region directly into the city center. Gives us the possibility to connect people directly to the city center. But as this result, traffic in the pedestrian zone increases more and more, not by the cars and individual situation, but by the public transport. And so we very, very new, and it's very brand new that we opened I think one of the European smallest trams last Saturday, and you see these also on my little images. So we have now the chance to create and to design the open space in the city center, which improves a lot of more open spaces in the city, to give this stage back to the people and to give this open space back to the people, which is very, very crucial in this after our experience of the COVID situation. And for sure, not the 15-minute city is our goal, the 5-minute city. 5-minute city is our goal because we are much smaller than Paris. And as you see also on my little images, the approach, we could engage Gel-Architekten to focus on how to build the environment concept for people in the inner city, and this is our approach.
Yes, thank you, Anke Karmann. I would like to continue a bit on this topic of mobility, but also the pandemic. I noticed that Frans Jorna mentioned that in his city, let's say, different forms of active mobility have become much more popular, and that there was a reduce of car mobility in his city. Now, this might be different in a German city, perhaps, but you should tell us. But I would like to know to what extent, actually, the impact of the pandemic was led to a sort of a revision of your mobility strategy in the city of Karlsruhe, and then more specifically dealing also with the innovation possibilities of digitalization. So how to use, indeed, I mean, what Frans Jorna also mentioned, how to use digitalization as a form to give, let's say, to further promote other forms of mobility that have become more popular as a result of this current pandemic crisis.
Yes, we have an app for the city of Karlsruhe, which is called Regio Move, which connects really all modes of mobility. So you can book from point 1 to B all the modes of mobility you would like to have. But I think the city of Karlsruhe is already quite active in active mobility, because we have 55% in active mobility, more than 30% in cycling. So, and we just set up a new program with our municipality committee that we will have in 2035 70%, which is really a big goal. And we are working on that. But I think we are one of the cities which are on a really good way. But this is, we have a very nice climate, and we are a flat city. So we have some advantages which other cities perhaps don't have. But we are really on this way. But that digitalization is one of the cross issues. It's not the main focus. We use it because it's useful to use it and it's helpful. But we focus really on the projects which on the public on the mixed uses quarters and on the public spaces.
Thank you. Well, indeed, what you said, digitalization is a cross-cutting issue. It's one of the reasons also why it was added to the 3 dimensions of the city in this new Leipzig Charter. Because indeed it doesn't fit in one of those other 3 categories. But indeed, let's now broaden a bit our debate, and I would like to hand over to Leah, to you, because I see there's a new question in our chat. Perhaps you can take that one, Leah.
Sure. Speaking of digitalization or digital tools being handy and should be used because they're useful, I really like this notion that Anke Karmann-Woessner introduced. Niklas Mischkowski is asking, specifically Friederike Hackmann, how useful digital tools and events are to reach youth in comparison to in-person events relating to city policies. So for example, also on sustainability. Friederike, what are your experiences with that?
Well, we are still in the testing phase regarding our application. The idea was kind of, when you have building sites, etc., to very simply have very simple QR codes and then reach people where they're at, where they're in motion. As in kind of the younger generation in Oldenburg, and I think in many cities, especially with the Fridays for Future movement, are more interested in what happens to their city and their living environment. So making that available and not saying, sorry, I'm thinking of Douglas Adams here, but remember when they tore down the earth because no one said anything when the planning went through, and it's, complicated and slow, and making it available, sort of as a fun experience as well, which was the idea also behind making augmented reality in the field where you are, will make it more accessible. Regarding the different segments that I had in my project, I could definitely tell sort of where we focused on the younger generation and the older generation. We used, the younger the generation was, the more smartphones were in use, the more kind of active walking around the city was involved, and the older generation were interested in other things. So reaching them in that regard, using smartphones rather than just going, you can go on the internet and click on our little video of what we've got here, was definitely more successful in reaching a younger audience. Whether in the long run that will work as we hope it will have to be found out in another research project.
Yeah, well, and I wonder how that is perceived by other panelists. For example, Pierre Golz in Herne. Do you feel that the pandemic has maybe made you listen to your target group better, or even better understand how different solutions are used by different groups and people? Like Friederike Hackmann suggested earlier. Has the pandemic maybe made you listen more carefully?
I'm sorry for that, but I think it was a booster for politicians. In my opinion, the younger generation, for the moment, had a very clear idea of the future and which role digitization could play in educational processes, in citizen processes. For example, we have one of the oldest, I don't know the word for the moment, children and youth parliament in Germany. And I think up to 20 or 30 years now. And with them, we made some gamification democracy processes based on digitization, and that was a booster for engagement there. And if you do something else with the older people, the mindset is not the same. So I think we have to change the mind in future even more than the pandemic did. And I think it starts at educational schools, at activating citizens. For example, we created an Ideas Forum EV, it is called, for this. And we want to communicate with people. I think the smart city of future is not just sustainable or based on resource protection or climate protection. I think the smart city of the future is most communicative as possible. And so we have to make co-creation with citizens, with research. For example, Anke Karmann talked about mobility, and some research projects have to be discussed, because there are a lot of ethical questions we have to discuss with society when we are talking about artificial intelligence or machine learning. We have just had some projects based on machine learning, but we have to discuss in future what does it mean for citizens? And that's the most important approach, I think.
I wonder, Mark, if I may.
Sorry, I have another question.
I would like to, in a second, I would like to hear from Apeldoorn, from Frans Jorna, how you might have listened more carefully. Well, not you personally, but in your city, anyone with responsibility in your city, to the people and what they might need and how their needs have changed.
Yeah. It's interesting. I actually come from a different angle. So I'm also the commissioner for participation. What I saw, what we witnessed, is that there is an increased demand for transparency, for making clear what it is that we actually do, why we do it, when we do it, and that many of the participation processes, the formal participation processes and procedures that we had, were more and more perceived not as obsolete, but there was an outcry to listen much more closely to all of the regular ways in which citizens interact with us. I always tell my colleagues, we have about 10,000 interactions with inhabitants in our city each day. Let's just take that serious, learn from it, automate learning, create quick feedback loops. That is valued much more than the more formal participation processes. As to the question to the involvement of the younger inhabitants of Apeldoorn, we actually saw an increase of participation in the more formal processes. So, and the youth council that we have, that has been active for about 10 years, doubled in size. And last night, I was witness to a meeting of the youth council with our executive councillors to sort of discuss how they can be much more involved, because they are worried on how their future is affected by the pandemic and by the side effects of the pandemic on their lives. So that's helpful. Well, it's helpful in terms of involvement, and it's helpful because, I mean, transparency is something that we can tackle. It's easy. It's what we are there for. So that's the picture from Apeldoorn, Leah.
All right, now you may.
Yeah, well, I have a question which is perhaps the topic of another policy lab, but I would like to ask it in the last few minutes that we still have before we need to move to the closure. And that's a question actually about digitalization, the impact of digitalization within the wake, indeed, of the pandemic, with this huge rise of online retail and how it affects inner cities. I remember that Erwin Schwärzer also mentioned the importance of inner city development. Now, we see that many shops are having difficulties, not just because of the pandemic as such, but also because of changing patterns of consumers. I would like to ask, well, I would say basically, Anke Karmann and you again, Frans Jorna, how does this phenomena, which is there probably also to stay, affect the inner city development and then more specifically retail in your inner city centers? First, please.
Yes, I think you are completely right. We are trying to find this concept and we are working on this. And we need management for the quarters in the inner city to find out which are the wishes of the shops, what are the wishes of all the people who are living there, to have a quite high model split of living in the city still to keep it livable. And I think the cities are very different. We have the chance that we have a quite high level of living cities in the inner city. But we are really working on it. So we are working on this concepts. We engaged people to find out exactly these questions, to have on the one side the online shopping, on the other side the possibility to feel the materials and to have this shopping event in the inner city, to meet each other, not only to have restaurants, also to meet without consumption in the inner city. And I think it is really an ongoing process at the moment, and especially by these very, very long time of constructions, by constructing the tram in Karlsruhe. We have a lot of experience of that since quite a lot of years, and we are hard working on it. And you come in 3, 4, 5 years, and then we know it better.
It'll be a pleasure to come back to Karlsruhe, I must say. Frans Jorna, what is the experience of Apeldoorn in that respect?
Well, I could almost echo Anke in this respect. So what we see but I'll focus on the urban housing areas, the estates, where you see a massive increase of these small transporter vans going around continuously, creating an environment that is much less safe than people used to, well, at least feel like it. So that's one thing. A second phenomenon is we've seen that the old grocery stores on the micro level, they still function, but it is these mid-sized commercial retail areas that suffer dramatically, that are in dire need of redevelopment. Thirdly, increasingly we are receiving worrying comments that people see their streets change dramatically within 2 or 3 years. So they see these vans going around all day. They are, I'll put it, they are confronted with loading facilities for e-cars. They are confronted with a large number of small cells and other connectivity devices. And people are worried. I don't know about the German debate on the radiation effect of 5G. I'll leave it alone for now. But be it as it may, there is a segment in society that is increasingly worried and does not trust us anymore. And we all know these and the way it affects politics. So there is a dire need for reconnection of people in the cities who are witnessing the effects of all of this on their front lawns and the way that local politicians react to it.
Wonderful, and that indeed brings us back to these principles of good urban governance with all the values that are described in this new Leipzig Charter. I would like to thank all the panelists for your contributions to our discussion. And indeed, it is now time to hand over to our institutional hosts. And I would like to start with Erwin Schwärzer from the German Ministry. Please, to close this session, the floor is yours, Mr. Schwärzer.
Thank you, Martin. Yes, now it's up to me and Karen for a summary and a few closing remarks. I think one of the great qualities in European urban development is that we have an incredible richness of great examples across the continent to learn. It's very diverse. And today we have had the chance to learn from some outstanding Dutch and German examples. So I want to thank all speakers for giving us such valuable insights into the practice at the local level. It's very important to be grounded when working in a ministry from time to time. Thank you for that. I have been asked at various occasions in what way the new Leipzig Charter is actually contributing to integrated and sustainable urban development. I believe that today's Policy Lab has shown in a very plastic way that it works. I remember at a recent event, somebody called the new Leipzig Charter as a compass for cities. I think it's a good picture. Where do European cities want to go? What objectives are important to create sustainable urban environments for all? Every city is, of course, different, has its own challenges, conditions, and structures. That is why the Charter calls, among others, for a place-based approach and can only be a compass, not the ship itself to navigate the seas. So I really like this picture. We have heard a lot about what the common good means in practice, from a neighborhood-based common good index to the Nober shop concept. I hope I pronounced it well. I know that the common good may be first a difficult concept to understand, but it's already a well-established concept for many German municipalities and part of the spirit of many public planning authorities, such as in Ludwigsburg and many other cities. I'm pleased that we could explain more what it means in everyday urban development. I believe if we put the common good first, it means that we will have strong values that guide our planning practice. Yes, and digital instruments. I used to be responsible for digitization in German ministries for a lot of years, so I know what I'm talking about. Digital instruments can help cities in so many ways, different ways to achieve many of these objectives. The examples of today have shown that there's a lot of potential in this field. We should explore a lot more in the future. Transparency is very important. It can be reached with digital instruments very, very well. So for me, it has been, I hope for all of you, it has been very enriching to see how Dutch and German frontrunner cities in this field engage citizens in this process, because only when we get citizens involved, cities will be able to develop sustainable measures. And especially in this cross-cutting dimension of digitalization, it's important to consider also the potential risks that some people may have left behind. Reaching persons of all ages and capabilities is very important. In addition, we have learned how important it is to give cities the resources to experiment with new approaches and instruments, so we can constantly improve national policies and local strategies and support local strategies. This is why we will continue to invest into pilot projects as a part of our strong national urban development policy. The pilot projects constantly give us food for thoughts like today. Thank you very much for these new ideas and for new thoughts you placed into my mind. In all the examples of today, we have encountered the many principles of the new Leipzig Charter and the role they play to create livable and future-proof cities for all. So let's keep working together in the future in the spirit of the new Leipzig Charter to make sure that European cities continue to thrive and overcome many challenges we face right now. Thank you very much. And now it's up to you, Karl. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, also thank you for letting me close this policy lab as well. I actually have some notes on the other side, so my eyes sometimes will focus somewhere else, but let me hope I can say this. we know that the Leipzig Charter, the impact of the Leipzig Charter can be very strong when applied in practice. And I heard some wonderful examples and some important messages. And I hope I do all of them justice. I would like to name a few which really, well, stood out for me. So I'm just going to use my notes. I think during the first panel, when we talked about the common good, Albert Geiger said very nicely, the Leipzig Charter is a milestone document which describes the DNA of the European city, with common good as its highest goal. Ufuk Kâhya said that we should reinvent how to govern in this 21st century, and should be enabled, not restricted. And we should have actually the courage, which I'm very interested to see in how you will do this in practice, the courage to make choices of unequal investments. That was quite an interesting concept. The concept of neighborhood as a house also had a lot of resonance with me, which I think is a beautiful concept. I find it very also interesting in seeing the parallels with the development of quality of life approach that the ESPAN is developing on the more territorial agenda side. So that's interesting to see how they would work together. During the digital panel, also on the effects of the pandemic, it was quite clear that there were so many examples of the changes that have affected us by the pandemic. And a lot of the examples were on the movement of persons and of vehicles and mobility, but also the more personal side, the change in trust and the need to reconnect was very clear to me. And in the digital side, actually it was quite interesting because there was not much of a negative approach. It was a lot of the speakers, like Pierre Golz, he said the pandemic was not disruptive. It kept us on track with the partnerships. Friederike Hackmann, she said that it helped her more, to help the citizens in the capability of their digital tools. So it increased the importance of this help. From Apeldoorn, he said, as a commissioner for participation, which is an interesting concept, he saw an increase of the transparency wish, but also the more smart city concept. Anke actually said that digitalization on its own is not a focus issue. It's something that enables us. And for Karlsruhe, it was very important to have the 5-minute city and the open spaces for citizens. And I think I would like to end this with some of the quotes that Frauke Burgdorff started with. She said, "Europe is as strong when its cities are strong." And I think that is exactly what the Leipzig Charter says. That is also what the urban agenda says. That's what I say as an envoy. So it's something that would take to heart. And she also said that the Leipzig Charter is a very normative document, which gives a framework of augmentation and argumentation and places of the common good as a center of decisions. And with that, I think I agree with Erwin that that it's very clear that the new Leipzig Charter serves as a compass for our exchange on the sustainable urban development. And with that, I would like to thank all the speakers and everybody that has taken part in this policy lab. And it leaves me with actually a moment to wish you a wonderful holidays, healthy 2022. And I think in German, because I do speak some German, einen guten Rutsch gewünscht, I would say. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Karen. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you, indeed, who have made this event, this policy lab, as interesting as it was. There's not much to add for us, I think, Mart. But just, again, thank you to the participants, to everyone who followed us, who asked questions. Make sure, if you liked it, to pass on the recording to your colleagues, because, spread the word, learn from each other. That is what we're trying to do with policy labs as the EUKN. Thank you again to all speakers. It has been said, but I want to reiterate it. You've made a great contribution sharing your insights. Thank you to our dear interpreters, who I'm sure, I didn't hear them, but I'm sure did a fantastic job. And thank you to all the colleagues here, production team, and our colleague Livia, and everyone at the EUKN, making this happen with everything you don't see in front of the camera. We will create a report, this is part of the game, on this policy lab, right? Well, forgive us that it will not be finalized this year, but we will take some time in early 2022 to have this report online, and then you will hear about it. And as I said, in the meantime, you can rewatch this recording and pass it on to anyone who you think might be interested in it. Mart, do you have anything to add to close?
Well, just to say, no, not really. The only thing is that we will continue working on the new Leipzig Charter in the spirit of the new Leipzig Charter, also in working with the new presidencies next year. I already mentioned in my introduction the work with the French presidency on the social aspects, the just city. And in the second half of next year, we will continue debates on digitalization. So I would say keep posted, stay connected also to our network. And like Karen said, I do like that expression. I knew it already from my visits to Germany. And guten Rutsch, which is a wonderful expression in German. So thanks to all to you, and see you next year. Bye-bye.